Hello, and welcome to this webinar on the commercial patent mindset. My name is Ola Wassvik, and I'm an experienced patent strategist. I'm the CCO and co-founder of Lightbringer, but during the last 20 years, I've been a CTO for deep tech companies, mainly a company called Flatfrog. On the side, I also do business and sci-fi and fantasy books. One important thing about this webinar, as with every webinar I do, is that this is business advice and not legal advice, and there can be a difference in your specific case. You should always consult a professional when it comes to your company, because the devil's in the details when it comes to patents. But this is built on experience of 20 years as a deep tech entrepreneur, 15 years as the CTO for Flatfrog, where I handled more than 300 patent families globally. So one of the key things that a lot of startup founders get wrong is that they assume that to get any value out of a patent, they sooner or later have to go to court. And let me put it the opposite way. If you have to go to court to get value from your patent, you're doing something seriously wrong and you're probably wasting a lot of money. You should first and foremost consider your patents a business asset and not a legal asset. They create massive credibility with customers, investors, partners, and potential acquirers. There are many different aspects to patents that you really should think about in depth before you discard them as just a legal tool. They really help prove that the company owns something unique and the company owns something defensible. And most of the value here comes outside of the courtroom. So let's start by looking at patents as a sales tool. And I put this first because I think this is where most deep tech founders and deep tech executives get things wrong. They underutilize the power of the patent as a sales tool. The thing that a patent does is that it signals that your technology is unique and not generic. It's a signal that if they go to someone else, they are at risk. And every single customer that you're selling to, and especially the larger customers, want to maximize risk reduction. When you're in a sales process with them, you can assume that the main thing they are looking for is not to mess up their existing business or the business that they're building. So having a patent for the technology sends a clear signal to the customer that you can't get this from anywhere else, especially when it comes to very advanced technology where the customer might have to do a custom project, their own internal project, to integrate your technology into their company or their product. That makes it even more risky. They're not just buying your product, they're actually buying a solution where they have to do a large project. And often this project is many times larger than your company. So as a concrete example, one customer that we went into, it was a $10 million business for us. But for them, it was a $500 million business because they had to put so many people to work to get things done, to make sure that the products got out, but also in building the sales and marketing channels around this. So very likely, when you're a startup and you're dealing with especially larger customers, their investment is much larger than your investment, and that makes the risk aspect even worse for them. So if we dig a little bit deeper into why enterprise buyers are risk managers, they worry about messing up. If there's anything you should know about enterprise sales, is that they are risk averse and their main concern is that they fail, not that they actually succeed. The risk of failure is a bigger driver than the opportunity of success. This means that if you come in and you offer your solution and it doesn't have great IP protection and there are multiple competitors on the market, or they might be one or two other competitors at least, it's much less likely that you actually get the customer project if you have the weaker IP protection. Because the first thing they will ask is, why don't you have IP protection? And then they will ask, how do you position yourself versus this other technology? And just by asking that question, they basically asked you, what is the risk of that company suing us if we buy your product? Because the competitor will never sue you. It's very unlikely that they will sue you. And I'm talking from personal experience here. You sue their customer because they are the ones that have all the money where you can actually get something out of the lawsuit rather than suing the small startup competitor that you have. And quite often they just discard you outright. And they do this in a way, just the same way as you get ghosted by an investor, you will get ghosted by an enterprise client. They will nod along and be happy and seem very interested, and then it will just not go anywhere. And quite often, this is because they thought the risk of implementing your technology was too high. And patent filing make this adoption feel much safer because it shows this is something that you actually own. And it might seem strange that a large company would prefer a startup to have patents, but they do, because that reduces their risk of someone else coming in and saying, hey, this is our technology. Investors are similar but different. They are absolutely risk reducers, and the very first thing they want to do is to reject as many possible investments as they can for reasons that are clear. And one of the reasons that are clear is that the deep tech company they're trying to invest to doesn't have proper IP and patent protection. If you have ever been in a fundraising scenario, you know that these investors will listen to hundreds, if not thousands, of pitches from different startups. And imagine yourself being in that pile of 100. The first the investor does is, okay, now I need to reject 90. And they find all the red flags they can. And one of the red flags, for particularly for deep tech companies, is lack of IP and patent protection. So just because you hadn't done it, you don't even pass the first milestone. Second item is that the patents actually attach the IP to the company. Quite often, startups are very reliant on founders, and this is a major risk for an investor. But if the patents, basically the ideas that the founders had, are actually registered to the company, that risk reduces immensely. Because then it doesn't matter if one of the co-founders leaves or something happens to that person. The company can, not as well, but can continue without them, and the investor reduced risk. And another reason why it's important for them, because there will likely be another investment round. And they know that other investors will also think this is important. And this is especially important when you go for larger rounds, because the further along you get in your fundraising journey, the more serious investors will take patents and IP. So even though you, as a very new startup, it's maybe enough to have one patent, when you're going for that $100 million raise later on, one patent will absolutely not be enough. You need to have a very solid portfolio, and it will not just immediately come out of thin air as you're trying to raise the big round. It needs to be built up over time. One thing that comes a little bit later, and which I've found out the hard way, is that one thing that you should protect for dear life in your company is your margin. It's basically the actual money you can pay salaries with, preferably make a profit on. The margin is holy. And the very first thing that the customer will do is try to reduce your price and thereby reduce your margin. And if you have no leverage, if they have 3 other sources to buy from, you will immediately get pushed down as far as they can. But if you are delivering a key feature that is patented that they can't get from someone else, then you can basically push back and say, sorry, we're the only vendor of this feature, of this type of product. You can only buy it for us. So let's discuss how you get the volume break instead. If you buy twice as much, I will give you a 10% discount. but you don't want them to push on price because someone else has a similar product. And it also makes it much, much harder for the customer to replace you, because whether you like it or not, every single customer of yours ideally would like to have at least dual source scenario where you are one vendor and there is one other vendor, and they can play you against each other and get the best possible low price at the best possible service level. And again, if there is no option to go for number two, then you have a much better negotiation position. And the interesting thing is here that you can have different patents that protect different product lines. And this is one of the ways that you typically build a portfolio of different products in different price tiers. You will have your mainstream, you will have your premium, you might have your low-cost solution, and you should have different patents protecting the different ones. So if someone wants to buy the premium product, and get the certain feature, that certain feature is then patent protected, and they know they can't get it from anyone else, which means that you can charge more money. Finally, we come to marketing. So marketing, and also actually marketing goes towards pitching versus investors. One of the great things about patents is that as soon as you file them, you're actually allowed to start talking about them, and you don't have to talk about the whole patent. You can pick and choose. You can cherry pick which parts you actually want to disclose. When it comes to investors and customers, I like to call this the deep tech striptease. You want to show a little bit skin over time, but you don't want to throw off your clothes all at one time. Ask anyone who's been shown a striptease. That's not the way to do it. You need to show a little bit more and more every time. And ideally, versus investors or customers, you want to show as little as possible. And the things that you show to them should be patented, because even if they go away and tell your competitor, it's still patent protected. If you start disclosing trade secrets that are not protected, they can, and very likely will, spread it to others. And especially if you're in an early stage and you're going into these discussions with customers where they are big and scary and you are small, having that patent protection and actually talking about the stuff that is patent protected. And basically, every time you say something new, you can say, by the way, this is patent pending. You can communicate this. You can use the patent pending as we are continually innovating. And you can also choose which benefits that you actually choose to communicate and which part you choose to keep secrets, because you have to keep things secrets. Because again, if you take off all your clothes, you will be there as the emperor without clothes, and things will turn out badly. When it comes to public funding and grants, here it's more the same thing as an investor, where it's very likely that they just want to reject you, and they want to make sure that the public funds go into something that actually is unique, so they don't just put money into a company that wants to have a better market position versus their competition. So it's clearly proven that if you have a stronger IP and patent protection, you have a higher likelihood of getting non-dilutive funding. Non-dilutive funding is very attractive and very hard to get, and your chances of getting it is significantly higher if you have patent protection. Quite often, when you're a startup, you need to do partnerships. And partnerships can be with other startups. You preferably do that as little as possible, because a customer going to buy something from two startups is twice as risky as buying it from one startup. But you might have to do a collaboration with a little bit larger company, with a production company, with some kind of institution. And if you have patents in place and have clear IP, that partnership will go much more smoothly. Because if it's clear what you own and what they own, there will be many, many fewer conflicts. Because what you don't want to end up in is having to argue based on a contract who owns what. That is going to turn out very messy. And let me tell you again from experience, the one that filed the patent first typically gets it, because it's extremely difficult to convince someone that they didn't invent it first when they patented the thing first. So it makes the collaborations much cleaner, which can again sound strange, but it is because you have a clear division of this is mine and this is yours when you go into the collaboration. If there is one thing that startups do way too little, it's to put patent pending over every single thing you can. It should be on every sales sheet. It should be on every data sheet. It should be on your web page. It should be in your marketing. You have actually something unique. And as soon as you have it filed, you're allowed to put patent pending. You will see patent pending on more products than you would think when you start looking. And it's an extremely powerful way of saying, this is mine and you can't get it from anyone else. And you should continually, consistently communicate this in investor and customer conversations, and don't do it in an aggressive way. Don't say, I patented this, so you can't get it from anyone else. You say, we have filed 5 different patents to this technology to strengthen our innovation position, and 100 other ways of saying it. You say it in a nice way that makes it clear that we have strong patent protection. And you make sure that your salespeople also say it. It's not enough if it's said once in one meeting. It should be in every single meeting as a small reminder without being obnoxious. You should also be very accurate so you don't get it wrong. Pending is as soon as you've filed the patent, and there's a certain time before it gets granted, but you have protection from the day that it was filed at the time of grant. It's a little bit complicated. I've gone through it in other webinars, so have a look at those if you don't know exactly how this works. But if a patent is pending, it should be presented as pending. If a patent is granted, it should also be communicated in that way. But the important thing here is that if you say patented, we have a patent on it, or it's covered by patents, that needs to be granted patents. Otherwise, you should say we have pending patents or patents pending, because there is a big difference actually being an allowed granted patent versus something that is pending. Both are very powerful, but there are important distinctions. So try to use either patent pending, if the patents are actually pending, or granted, covered, patented, if you actually have a granted patent on it. So now we've gone through this a bit, and what I would like for you to take away from this is the first thing you should not be thinking is, can we sue someone? Or how do we sue someone? Or what happens if we go to court? That is the second thing you should be thinking about. It's the last defense that you have. What you should be doing right now with your pending patents or your granted patents is to ask yourself, how can this help us increase sales, raise more money for the company, negotiate better contracts with the customer, and scale our business? Those are the things that you should be focusing on. And if your entire management team isn't fully aligned on what patents you have and what you can do with them, then you're doing something wrong. This is not something that sits under the CTO. The main user of your patent portfolio is likely your vice president of sales, or the person who's doing sales that might be a very business-friendly CEO. That is the person who should know these things, and that is the person or persons that should be using them as much as possible. The CTO delivers the innovations that can be patented and, of course, handles the patent portfolio typically, but is normally not the person to use it. So if you're a CTO and listening to this, you should tell your CEO or your VP of sales that they're actually the ones that should have been to this webinar. So treat the patents as something that you do in company building and not in a pure legal defense way. Of course, if you have to, and if a competitor starts stealing your market from you and copies your product, yes, of course you have to take the legal aspect into play. But 99% of the time, you will actually not be using your patents for that. You will be using them for the business. Okay. Then Thank you very much for this. Feel free to share it in any way you like with anyone you want, because spreading this type of information is good for startups and good for the technology community. Thank you.